I'm Stanley H. Dalton. I've gone by Bud all my life because my dad's name was Stanley V. Dalton. And I grew up here. I moved here as a 2-year-old, and when my dad got a job on the faculty here in teaching botany. My first job, which you couldn't have today, was digging dandelions on the campus. A bunch of other little boys. I started out at 9 years and 10 months old, and I was getting 18 cents an hour. But by July, they raised it to 22 cents an hour, and that was pretty good. We at 10 years old weren't worth minimum wage, but yet we got done what needed to be done. Like in those days, they didn't spray. We were digging dandelions. Oh, another thing that I forgot to bring up was that there was a period of time where we worked alongside the German prisoners of war on the grounds. We were digging dandelions, and they had them hoeing flower beds and stuff like that. And there would be about 10 of them, and they'd have one MP with an M1 carbine standing there. They could have passed that M1 around and let them take turns guarding each other because they weren't going anywhere. We housed them out at one of the barns out there on the experiment station. The barn's still there, I think. And on Sunday you could see them playing soccer out there in the field. And so they had a pretty good life, and they would farm them out to different farmers around here to help with harvest and stuff like that. They came from Concordia. Concordia had a humongous POW camp, and they only sent the good ones here. They had some real bad ones there at Concordia. Looked like ordinary guys. Dad came here August 1st in 1935. He had been principal of the high school at Colby. He was on the teaching faculty until I think 38, and then he was appointed to be registrar and served that position until he retired. But he always continued to teach because he wanted to. He said it, one, gave him an excuse to get out of the office, and it also let him be able to walk both sides of the street between administration and faculty and say, well, I'm one of you guys too, and now to get your grades in, I got mine in. And he was the first registrar. Before that, it was done by the dean's office. And I guess they got to the place where they thought, well, we actually really need a full-time registrar. Dealing with people was his greatest joy until 2 years before he retired. At graduation, he would call them by name without a list because he knew them all as friends. He got a note from 2 boys from Brooklyn that wanted to come to 4 days. Why, I don't know. And he wrote him and said he would meet him at the train. And when they got here, it turned out to be Teddy Tedesco and Mickey Spillane. Mickey played football, which you would expect. And then he left to join the Army and became a fighter pilot. Then Teddy Tedesco's went back to New York and became a high school administrator, but he sent his 3 kids here. Nola became the district attorney for Wichita, and she's the one that prosecuted the BTK killer. It was Rich Romer that told me of the saying in the 40s that Wooster is president, McCartney thinks he is, and Dalton does all the work. His first office mate was Dr. Wooster, and they became really, really good friends for life. I remember they officed in the 3rd floor science building, which is now Albertson. Then that office opened into the further room, which had snakes and everything wonderful in there. And I enjoyed going in there and looking at the snakes and everything. But anyway, he and Dr. Wooster became very, very good friends. And when Dr. Wooster's first wife died. He married Mrs. Ripito, who was a widow here. My dad was his best man. Dr. Wooster, I'm sure, was a botanist also. He was president in 46, I think he became president. And then Pete Cunningham came in 49. MC Cunningham is his initials, and I think the M stands for Morton, and I'd go by Pete too. But he was a really great guy, and a goer and a doer. He built the president's house. They were there in 49. He was the first one to move into that house. But Jerry Tomatic, I knew forever as a student here in the 30s, and then later, and my dad taught him botany, biology, and bacteriology. My dad was a regular with Sternberg. He took me along, took me every place with him, and we'd go out to the fossil beds or chalk beds out in Gove County and dig. And then when Sternberg discovered what he had, Sternberg became a permanent resident of that pasture, and he wasn't about to let anything happen to it. And then finally, when it came time to pour the cast for that fish, he and Jim Rouse. Now, Jim Rouse was superintendent of the college farm, and he was in on a lot of the activities also. And they decided they were going to take plaster and water out to George Sternberg out there in Gove County, and so they got a pickup and some plaster and water, and it was a triple-digit heat day, and so they decided that probably they better they stopped at Ellis and got some ice, I think a couple of 50-pound blocks of ice, because they decided that the water would, by the time they were ready to pour the plaster, the water would be way too hot and the plaster would set too quickly. So they got the ice, and it all ended up working out well. But he and Jim and my dad poured the plaster. I don't remember when and how they brought it in or dug it up, but then they flipped it over and Sternberg worked on it, and so they got it here to the museum here, which was over on Forsyth, was over there. Across what is now Bill Jellison Bridge, we called it Custer Hall Bridge, then was Custer Hall. And in back of it, next to the creek, was apple orchards, and then that faculty gardens. And most of the faculty members in those days were farm boys, and of course they had gardens, and he raised strawberries and corn and potatoes and everything else. And it was not one of my favorite pastimes when Dad would say, "We're going to the garden," and we'd push the plow over there, and I remember it was not much fun. Mosquitoes were bad. We had what was the Cody Commons. It's where the student union is today, and it was the cafeteria. And most of the faculty would eat for lunch there after church. And I remember Dr. Albertson and his wife were always there. The faculty picnics is what I remember. We would go to either College Hill or Custer Island or the Frontier Park and have a potluck dinner, and they were always very fun for the kids because there were other kids there, and we played, and the folks mainly visited about the coming war and the war. Now, Custer Island is on the property owned by the K-State Experiment Station. It had shelter houses out there. There was a dam, and that you had to go across the cable bridge to get to Custer Island. Now, there is a marker out there, and as far as I know, it's still there. It needs some repair. But anyway, the Custer Island had to be a partying place. And the kids were out there and everything else, so they just completely blocked off the bridge. You can't drive there anymore. If my dad were alive today, he would be super impressed and amazed at what Fort Hays has become and all that it is. It was such a small school back then, and we couldn't fathom the growth that it has had and its importance to the university system.